Kurt, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris. And I'm a fan of the podcast. I like the format. I like that you can geek out a little bit and still keep it in understandable terms that people can follow along with.
Awesome. So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Uh, Longtime entrepreneur for the last 25 or 30 years. And today we have a startup called BUNKR. Also the chair of a foundation called the Long Family Force for Good. And that is meant toward the spiritual and mental well-being of children and families, and have a deep and lasting interest in kind of aligning all these things in terms of, can we create businesses that are financially prosperous for all involved, but do good in the world. And you'd be surprised at the how tricky that topic can be. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I'd like to think I spent a lot of time practicing it. It's just a passion of mine that I continue.
I love that philosophy. It's one of the reasons why I started the podcast. In that I have a profitable business that gives me a soapbox and a platform where I can run the podcast so far without any advertising,
Good for
on
you.
my dime, to try to help the world be a better place and protect people from all the crazy stuff that goes out there, and educate people where they don't have to pay for it. I think our philosophies are definitely aligned.
Good.
So, how did you get involved in technology? Was there a passion when you were a kid of your Atari 400, or what was your technology journey like?
Well, I grew up in Florida, and we spent a lot of times outdoors, and did spend time in school and try to do well, but a lot of time outdoors. And I was old enough to see the Apollo launches at night from across the state.
No
So this
fun.
idea that you could see, obviously can't see it in detail from 150 miles away, but you can literally see the launch. And you'd look up a couple days later and you'd see these literally astronauts on the moon or in orbit, and you think, that's real. I mean, this is a real thing. I wrote the Space Center maybe when I was 13 or 14. They wrote back that
No,
confirmed it
wow.
was real. So, like, this is a real thing, and maybe I could work there someday. And about 8 years later, I did just that. I graduated when I was 21 from the University of Florida in computer information science, and I was fortunate enough that worked at Kennedy Space Center, and that was a foundational experience of the first technology experience where I worked with really bright people who cared about one another and cared about the mission that we were all there for.
Hmm.
And had it not been for them and that mission of space flight, by then it was the space shuttle, I wouldn't have stayed in technology my whole life. But I got addicted to doing hard things that are bigger than yourself with people that care, and seeing it come true.
I like that concept of. I think particularly with technology, of how can we do something that's never been done before, that they say, that the quote unquote they, whoever they are, that they say
Mhm,
can't be done, and let's
mhm.
let's achieve the unachievable is a fascinating thing for me.
I think that, I just think that we should aspire to do things bigger than ourselves, knowing that, listen, let's just say there's 30,000 people in the Brevard County, which is by the Space Center industrial complex, working on that mission. Clearly, it's just so overwhelmingly obvious. Like, this is a team effort, but to know that you contributed something, an
Hmm.
important part. You'd like, and if you made a mistake, you're letting everyone down. And so when we had launches, the entire county was so pleased and happy that night. I'm sure we drank extra alcohol or something like this on the successful launches. And then across the entire launch complex in the United States and around the world, everybody was so prideful, and you knew you did your part and it has to work, but you knew there was all these other people that you had to work together with.
Yeah, that's I love that whole concept. I love that philosophy of and I look at it as like one when you're doing this sort of stuff, one little mistake has massive consequences, and everybody has to get everything right 99.99999% of the time.
It's all true. That's a whole nother path to go down. Everything you said is absolutely true, but if you get me going on that, we'll never get to security and privacy. So the only thing I would say, my bio, you'll see Hubble Space Telescope, Venus Radar Mapper, Galileo, Ulysses. Those are the four scientific missions that I like to think I contributed something to, and meaning my part, and it's an important
Mhm.
part, but it's a small part. And those are things that, my entire life that I will feel great about. And wouldn't trade those things for any other aspect of my career. And but it's in the past, and that's where we'll leave it for now.
Okay, one more question about it.
Yeah.
When you see photos taken by Hubble, do you
Mhm.
think I not that I took that photo, but a little bit of the hey, that's because of the work I did?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's yes is the short answer. It's built in, kind of like your intuition. There's like a sense of ownership,
Hmm.
no matter how big or small. Like, it matters. It's meaningful. It matters. So every time, and even James Webb Telescope, when you see that it's part of a heritage,
Hmm.
that Hubble proved these things could be done. And James Webb came along and took it even further. And while I don't have anything to do with that mission, you feel like you're part of that heritage and you feel connected. And it's an amazing feeling to have part of your whole life.
You help lead, you help lay the foundation for the next generation of technology in space telescopes and whatnot.
Just as people before us, whether we say it's in space or in computing, wherever you want to pick, we stand on the shoulders of the people who come before us. And the older you get, the more you realize that. And I think that's a really important idea, that there's this deep respect for, like, for example, my lead, Bill Galloway, graduated from Berkeley, electrical engineer. His father worked on the Manhattan Project, which famously was the conception creation of a nuclear bomb that ended World War II. And I know there's a movie out, Oppenheimer, and you can twist that up a little bit, but I can tell you for sure, Bill Galloway passed his pride and his father's work along to me. And I can assure you that whatever standards his father held him to, Bill held me to those standards as well.
That's cool. So let's transition into talking about privacy and security,
Yes.
and we'll have some fun rabbit holes to go down. And I know that your kind of specialty, what you're working on, is messaging platforms
Mhm.
and kind of the intersection of government and law and how all these things roll in together. Let's take a step back and kind of can we talk a little bit about the history of messaging platforms, if that's a little bit of background that you have and kind of where it's come from and where you see it going?
Yeah. You know what? I might just go a little bit further back, if you don't mind, Chris, to the beginnings of my security career. I was a TCP/IP, what's called a sockets programmer, if you're old enough to know what
Ooh.
sockets were. Yeah. So I was, you know, I was I was pretty good at it. And basically that is the lower level programming that you can send messages to computers on. And you use these different protocols depending on the use case. So when you hear TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, IP, Internet Protocol, these are reliable protocols. TCP is, and I knew all about that. And I was very invested in that, and just thought, oh my gosh, we can connect computers around the world. So when the internet hit say the commercialization of the internet hit in the mid 90s, I just thought, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing that could ever possibly happen to a TCP/IP programmer, sockets programmer. And I made my way to Netscape Communications
Hmm.
Company. And when they were like 30 people, they were still called Mosaic. And I would go out there and meet with the product managers and started my first security business around the Netscape platform. And people's names like Ben Horowitz and Frank Chen and Greg Sands and even Mark Andreessen. Those are all people that were in that circle, like a very brilliant set of people that would go on to shape the internet. And then I knew how to kind of apply the products and the programming to write applications. So I, in
Hmm.
effect, wrote a reverse proxy server to enable very important information, billing information for a giant telecommunications company to offer that online. The proxy server put the data in what's called a demilitarized zone, where it's multiple layers of security. You don't ever have to actually expose it. And that's basically how I got into security. Is I was
Hmm.
an infrastructure guy, and then I started a whole company around single sign-on, access controls, and then that company wound up selling product all around the world. And that was Open Network, and it was acquired by BMC, but it all started with literally in the very early days, me writing some programs. And I know you're asking about messaging. I'm maybe one or two steps away from that, so bear with me. So my first foray was single sign-on, access control, identity management.
Hmm. It's funny because when I look back to I had some involvement, not as a consumer, let's say,
Yeah.
on the internet in the early '90s, and I got involved in email messaging and
Yes.
looking at how email messaging worked. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I found interesting about the early internet was this uh, concept of almost implicit trust and
Yes.
that when you're sending data, it was always assumed, well, you are the legitimate originator of the data, and
Yes.
everybody who touches that data as it transits around the world is going to do the right thing, and they're going to hand
Yeah.
it off to the next entity to get that
Yeah.
data where it's supposed to go. And the person who gets it is going to say, yes, I'm the intended recipient. And everybody trusts everybody
Okay.
throughout that entire process. To me, was like, oh, this was definitely made by people who, by educators and purists
Yeah.
who didn't think about the bad guys yet.
So that's a great point, and that's a really good segue to the messaging idea. So yes, spent the first 10 years of security and privacy on this infrastructure and how do we authenticate people? How do we make sure people can go to the right places? But during that journey, you start finding out that the tools we're using, like email, were exactly what you said.
Yeah,
They were assumed to be for use on internal
yeah,
department DARPA communications. And there's no real concept built in of authentication, if you will. There's no real concept of agreed upon encryption standards that keep those messages secrets. And it turns out that they pass through many different routers and switches, and those routers and switches can be compromised.
yep,
And you eventually figure out that, oh, wow, so an email is just absolutely insecure. It's vulnerable to imposter attacks, and you might call it social engineering, but I'll just say imposter. And that turns into these phishing
yeah,
attacks where you send these false emails, and that leads to account stuffing and password stuffing, and so those insecure communication channels that the public is almost forced to use because businesses use them, of email, and most certainly I would include text messaging in
hmm,
there, and I would include social messengers in there in terms of not so much the encryption, but of vulnerable to imposter and social engineering
yeah,
attacks. So the public is left with a collection of tools that were absolutely never intended to secure our communications. And they have fed this incredible outbreak of crime where cybercrime is going to be the third largest economy in the
Yeah.
world after US and China, by 2025, I think it is, and it's hit like $8 trillion of damages now. So
Oh.
that's my response to the messaging question. Like, you go from, hey, we're all good people and this is all about democracy, right? We're all going to be better, to, oh my gosh, the world is maybe not what I thought it was out there.
And do you think kind of I don't know that I necessarily call it a knee-jerk reaction, but I think now we're kind of swinging the opposite direction on messaging and moving data, in that it's everything is end-to-end, not everything, that we're end-to-end encrypting stuff. We have messages that disappear after we receive them, that Apple is, telling federal government, hey, we can't tell you who we can't tell you the text messages between these people because it's encrypted. We don't see this. We're not going to give it to you. And that it's almost kind of swung from this implicit trust to now we're intentionally putting in systems that have implicit distrust of everybody in the process.
I don't know if I can say anything better. Right? I mean, that's about it. It's really tough to respond when the host does it so well. Yeah, that's right. And so, like, if you think about things like WhatsApp and the founders of WhatsApp, their intention was to create a messenger that gave people privacy and security. And I think their interests were really well intended and genuine, and they did that. Famously, Facebook bought them while they were still called Facebook and not Meta. And famously, the treatment of privacy and security frustrated at least one of the founders to depart from WhatsApp,
Mm-hmm.
and create Signal, which is another, secret messenger. Famously, Snapchat was probably the first to come along and make famous disappearing messages. And that was basically for kids
Yeah.
to send pet messages that their parents couldn't see. Um, and there's the origin story around Snapchat, but we'll leave that out for now. But disappearing messages is certainly a big part of it. And so now we've got a collection of messengers when we include Telegram and Talks in there, that the entire purpose is to prevent legal due process.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, even with a warrant, law enforcement is not able to do their job. And while maybe that's a great use case if I'm a reporter, somewhere around Gaza in fear of my life from one side or the other, and I can't ever have anybody look at my messages. I get that.
Yep.
But the encryption where we're not going to cooperate with law enforcement at all breeds like a criminal use of these messengers. And famously, criminals and terrorists and every possible nefarious activity that you can think of kind of in part flourishes off their ability to communicate without any inspection ever by law enforcement. And I don't
Yeah.
want to characterize any one messenger. They're all slightly different, including iMessage. But as a general sentence, I stick by what I said.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting argument between philosophies, so to speak, that you have. Well, we should have absolute security and privacy, but we should also have safety. And so, yes, we want the reporter that is reporting on oppressive regimes to be able to do
Mhm.
that in a way that doesn't put their family at risk. But we also don't want the local crime boss disseminating his hit list to his hitmen via secure messenger, and us not being able to do about anything about it or know about it. And that's kind of, it sets up this almost a purist argument between these two things.
Yes, and I don't I mean, so I think there's different use. And by the way, this is all great debate. In other words, I
Yeah.
don't think it's as simple as saying this is the answer. But there need to be alternatives in the marketplace where there's, so for example, a balance between the public's right to privacy, and they do have a public right to privacy under the Fourth Amendment and protection from warrantless search. And I think we all deserve that. Versus legal due process, where, okay, yes, Kurt is suspected of insider trading, and the SEC or a legal subpoena of some kind says we can take a look at his messages to see if he really is trading on
Yeah.
that insider information and making money. And so I have the right to be protected until, there's a legitimate court order for the otherwise. And the only other thing I'd say right there, Chris, is like, you could make an argument to say, yeah, but you can't trust the courts, or I don't trust politicians and I don't trust this. At some point, I think we all have to make a stand and say, we have to trust somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue to trust the court system. That's probably my best chance at having something I can trust, because if we don't trust anyone,
Yeah.
civilization breaks down. So I would assert that, and we founded a company called BUNKR that does just this. It tries to strike the balance of messaging between the rights of the public versus the Fourth Amendment and the right to legal due process, and the right of victims to be able to seek justice in legal due process.
So are you? So I can see a case where you might say businesses. If you're a financial institution, let's because that's, you were talking SEC earlier. We're a financial institution, and our executives want to communicate about the business to one another. That maybe they shouldn't be doing that via. Let's pick on Snapchat for this conversation.
Whatever you want.
Because they can send a message to someone else in the company, it disappears, and there's no paper trail of what the executives of this financial institution are doing. I think consumers can look at that and say, yeah, in this situation, yeah, maybe they shouldn't be allowed to use end-to-end encrypted, non-warrantable, non-subpoena,
whatever.
Subpoenaable, is that a word?
Yeah.
That they can't use these platforms where, under the right circumstances, yes, the courts can reveal those conversations. Is that kind of what BUNKR is trying to be?
Yeah, so we could break that down a little bit. So, for example, in the finance industry, the Securities Exchange Commission has weighed in and said, hey, listen, these apps that don't support legal due process, all the ones we just said, basically, you are going to be fined heavily if you use them. And for the public good, I think we want transparency when it comes to our money. I mean, it's money's hard earned. Like, it does not come easy, as all of us know. And I don't think any of us really want a bunch of insider tradings, trading on our money.
Yeah.
So the SEC has stepped in and fined the banks billions of dollars of saying, you guys can't use these apps. Now, your question was a little more oriented toward the public, and to say, well, why can't I use them? Well, I'll give you one more. I'll give you a use case. So we have, let's take law enforcement, and it could be FBI. And FBI is handling, almost by definition, dangerous people that are, and some of them provide very important information to the FBI. And in this case, that agent has to be accountable for their interactions with say, a dangerous person. Maybe that person is providing a tip. Maybe it's an inside source. And law enforcement might take actions based on that, based on an informant. Well, law enforcement doesn't want a secret messenger, because if things go wrong, it's like, hey, you told us this. Well, my guy told me that too. So that doesn't work for them. So law enforcement, once they're conducting, they want to be legitimate people.
Hmm.
And they want to be able to show, hey, this is the chain of evidence as to why I took the action based on this informant. And kind of the last thing they want is not to be able to prove themselves. So that's a law enforcement. Now
Hmm.
I'll roll over to one more, Chris, if you'll endure me. And this is based on a real story, and it's happening more and more frequently. So while I'm going to tell it a little bit abstractly, forgive me,
Hmm.
but I want to do it to protect people. You get, let's say we have an insider trader, who also isn't just an insider trader, but they do legitimate business and they have legitimate friends. That's not their sole
Yeah.
purpose in life, is to inside trade. And they use I'm just going to call it a secret messenger. So as they use their secret messenger, they communicate with a large number of people that are legitimate people. And now all of a sudden, law enforcement has no ability to look in the messages. They know they have the one person who is indictable as insider trader, and all they know is this person communicates with all these other people,
Yeah.
but they're using a secret messenger with disappearing messenger. Well, guess what? Law enforcement shows up at the house of what you could say are the innocent
Yeah.
and say, we know you have a relationship. We know you communicate. You need to produce the evidence that shows you're not talking about insider trading. Well, guess what? They can't do it. Well, you're not convictable, but now you're drug in to a lawsuit or a criminal activity
Hmm.
because you can't defend yourself. So it's not intuitive how this is
Yeah.
playing out in the marketplace, but law enforcement doesn't have any choice but to make a little bit, I don't be a bit, I want to choose my words carefully, to be suspicious of people using messengers. And ultimately, you can get caught up in the web of criminal activity, and now you can't defend yourself.
It's guilty by association,
Yes,
but not legally guilty by
that's right.
association.
That's why I used the word suspicious. So I was trying to balance that act.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, hey, you've been communicating with this bad guy. We think you might have been part of the scheme, and now,
Correct.
and then I suppose those get out into court records, and those get
Correct.
out to the public, and all of a sudden it's, hey, Kurt communicated with this guy who was convicted of
Now
insider trading.
convicted.
So is Kurt part of it also? We see that he's doing well financially. Oh, I wonder if that sort of thing. It's
Correct. And then it can even cost people their employment because their employer doesn't want the affiliation of, say, a director, an executive, or anyone. But let's say those positions particularly, they do not want the sensitivity of those people having any affiliation
yeah,
with criminal activity. And you say, hey, listen, I didn't do it. Well, you can't really prove it, without a very, very lengthy discovery process, which is in itself not fun.
yeah. Do you want to have to turn out your entire life of, okay, here's every financial transaction I've ever made. Look at all my banking. Look at all my stock trades. And
Yes,
turn all that
that's
out
right.
and have someone turn your life upside down and inside out to say, okay, yeah, I guess we're okay with that.
You're right. And then the healthcare, it's the same conversation in terms
Hmm.
of regulatory action. It's SEC in healthcare enforcing these kind of laws and rules. And on the healthcare side, in the healthcare industry, it's more of famously HIPAA, and the Office for Civil Rights is the enforcement body. So you've kind of got multiple drivers of the need for a balanced messenger that protects privacy and security for the public, but respects the Fourth Amendment and tries to balance that with law enforcement and regulatory bodies.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk medical because I definitely want I want my doctor to be able to communicate with my pharmacist in a way that is secure and protects my privacy. But if the doctor does something wrong and prescribes the wrong medicine, I want a chain of evidence showing that the doctor made the mistake in
That is
communicating
correct.
to the pharmacist. So it's kind of this, there are some ways where the security and the privacy, the security and the privacy help us retain rights that we might otherwise lose. if that makes
Yeah, I mean,
sense.
again, the host has said it better than I can. So, that is correct. That's 100% correct. Is that you want to again strike the balance, and those, I think every physician knows you're not supposed to text message with your patients. And it's not an indictment of all text
Hmm.
messengers. It's just that generally it's very difficult to get cooperation. You can't use disappearing and secret messages. And it's for some of the reasons that you said. It's just briefly, I founded a company called Fair Warning. We invented and patented a whole series of analytics and techniques to discover bad actors within healthcare system, doing everything from identity theft to Medicare, Medicaid fraud, to opioid diversion, to snooping on your neighbor, to blackmailing people, to moving yourself up donor lists. I mean, that's a whole wild 15-year story. But we did that for about at one point, I don't know what it is now. Imprivata owns Fair Warning now, but it was about 60% of the hospitals in the US and many around the world used our software to protect patient privacy.
Hmm.
And the issues that you just raised are incredibly important, because if I can get, even the Chinese were famously sucking off medical data from health systems and insurers in order to blackmail ambassadors and people on the ground, senior level defense contractors. Our medical information is of a particularly human
Yeah.
vulnerability to us. So the healthcare industry is something near and dear to my heart, and they have special challenges. And yes, they have the same challenges as you described, and with the messaging.
So, do you see more and more? Gosh, I hate to say the word legislation, but more and more legislation around coming around where uh, messaging platforms that have a retention policy versus communication platforms that don't have that intentionally have a non-retention policy, starting to become like you were talking about in the SEC starting to find
Yes.
companies. Do you see other industries where this is just going to become the standard of like, well, you just can't do this anymore?
Well, let me start in the States first, and then I'll pick up the UK and France as examples, and the European Union in totality. Um, so in the US, we've got some logjam. The Congress, shockingly, has drafted legislation at different times. It has made it different segments of the way through the process, but to my knowledge, it's not anywhere close to being done. So in the
Hmm.
United States, we're going to live with this industry regulation, state regulation, lack of federal regulation, and this is the condition that we're in for the foreseeable future. In the UK and France, it's really different. They have like the UK has passed legislation that kind of bans these secret messengers, and at the same time, they can't quite get the courage to enforce it.
Yeah, yeah.
So they've got themselves where they've passed legislation, but I don't really see any evidence that they're going to want to enforce it. They're bordering on like over surveillance. In
Hmm.
other words, kind of skipping the warrant process as we know it and maybe over surveilling. So that's the UK, and then the France has a similar type circumstances. I don't recall if that legislation actually passed, but it was on the precipice. And then you have similar legislation in the EU, and in those markets, it's like, gosh, guys, we do want to protect. We do want to open this up so that we can look after the bad guys, but we can't overreact and just open mic it
Yeah.
and give the EU the ability to insert some kind of malware on your phone that they can listen to your mic and not even have to go through a warrant for it. And I do believe that I think this is amongst the most important issues of the 21st century, is trying to carry forward human rights
Hmm.
that have been hard earned, that we say we believe in our Constitution and in the United Nations Special Rapporteurs, but they're getting very loosey goosey with it all. And I still, that's, I don't want to say bunker too much,
Yeah.
Chris, but that's what we're trying to do with bunker is to say, hey, here's what we're trying to do is bring a balance to this thing. And that's my viewpoint on that.
So, are you also trying to move that for consumer communication, or is your particular drive at the moment? Um, this is a platform predominantly for businesses where there are regulatory issues that need to be managed, and you're not trying to. And your position isn't, "Hey, no consumer should ever use end-to-end encryption between family
No,
members."
we've got consumers, we've got public usage in 32 countries around the world at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's super popular with families, and it contains other elements of what might add to a family security posture, like password management, secure cloud
Mm-hmm.
storage. And so we've got families using the product around the world. We have athletes using the product around the world. We have entrepreneurs. We have physicians. We have pilots. We have a lot of great use cases for the public usage of it, and it grows every day. And it's kind of like a grown-up WhatsApp. WhatsApp for grown-ups. Like, you're not going to get any spam. You're not going to get any imposter attacks. Yes, you might have to cooperate with law enforcement, but if you want to do something like that, go use a different messenger.
Mm-hmm.
So it's worked out really great for legitimate public users and legitimate businesses.
I think you make a good point. Is that when the platform has a little bit, let me ask this: if the platform has a little bit more control about what is happening on the platform, uh, you're going to have less of the criminality on that platform.
Yeah, so that's actually what happens on free platforms is when you open them up to free to say, okay, no, and free kind of means like there's no, I use the word authentication, that
Mm-hmm.
there's any certainty that you are who you say you are. Let's just leave it at that. And you open it up, you just got a registration page, and now they can come on and start using it. What you get is criminals from around the world absolutely bombarding the platform. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they are using it to communicate. They're using it for secure file storage. That is well established. So it's like the first step is to, if you have someone pay for it, like
Mm-hmm.
just a little, 99 cents, like we're offering it to the public at 99 cents. Well, they have to have payment on file with the App Store or the Play Store. Is that perfect? No. But does it get rid of about
Yeah.
99.9%? And then when you say, oh, hey, listen, we might cooperate with law enforcement. Well, that's going to get rid of the other bad guys. So like what you get is you get legitimate people that want to conduct legitimate
Yeah.
business on the platform, and that's what we have.
And it's kind of interesting that you're able to. Uh, I like that you're able to chase away the criminals to some extent from using the platform by making it clear that, well, we're going to cooperate with law enforcement. So you, Mr. Criminal, really don't want to be here, and that just reduces. It just makes it a better environment for the people that use the platform. I like that.
It's not, I mean, it's the radical idea of providing a legitimate software service at a low price for legitimate public users and legitimate business. Like, that's radical now, but that's who we are.
Yeah.
And by the way, you chase away the bad guys. I mean, and then like we've got invitation only messaging. So you literally cannot get a message from someone that you don't know.
Yeah, and that's a lot of where the scammers come in. All those text messages. Hey, this is Bob. Is our appointment still at 2 o'clock today? Yeah, it's not Bob, and he doesn't have an appointment.
Yes, and there's not an Amazon package on its way that you need to fill out the credit card for, or whatever it is that all these crazy things that you get.
And that,
So we have a lot of important people on the platform.
mhm.
You know, that we tend to attract a lot of very important people, and they tell us if you ever open that platform up and let people look for us and try to connect to us, we will quit. So it's a very private, very secure, legitimate platform.
I like that. How do you, and maybe this is not something you can necessarily talk about, how do you then deal with the platform being used in countries with oppressive regimes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And
Let's just say North Korea, because I don't
yeah,
think anyone from North Korea is going to come after me for spelling them out.
a lot of it will come down to the payment, and we tend not to get. We will get some registrations from I'm just going to use the word difficult countries,
Hmm.
but we don't get a lot of them. And this is the vision. The vision is more like, listen, the entire planet deserves to conduct their affairs with dignity at bank level security.
Yeah.
That's the statement. So now you start saying things like, well, does that mean that we block Yemen? And the answer to that is a no. We're not going to block Yemen. What it means is that someone from Yemen can register and pay for the platform and communicate with their family, but by the nature of our architecture, they literally cannot reach out and go after
Hmm.
people outside of their connectedness. And it's worked out great. So I really do want to reach legitimate people all over the world, and maybe even more so if you're in a difficult country where we could help you have a stable, decent life.
Hmm.
That's a pretty good idea.
I guess my question was more
Yeah,
of, if Yemen came to you and said,
that's a
"Hey,
good
hey, we are
question.
we are we are legitimate representative
Yeah,
from the Yemen country, and there is two individuals in our country who we know have been communicating with our platform, and our laws say we're
yeah,
allowed to see their messages,
yeah.
but
I got teams of lawyers, Chris.
U.S. laws say no, you're not."
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be forthright with you. I mean, we literally have lawyers. I
Mhm.
thought I was going to, if you're a summary of the five people that you're around the most, I'm like, I'm going to turn into a lawyer, I'm pretty sure. We have lawyers that help us figure that out. My tilting would be toward the U.S. State Department,
Mhm.
and that is my allegiance. I'm a citizen and a law-abiding citizen of the United States. I think it's the greatest country on earth. And while I have incredible respect for everyone, my leanings are going to be toward what our State Department thinks, and we might have some difficult decisions in the future for us, but I welcome them.
Gotcha. So you're gonna. I know there are a number of entities out there that, hey, yeah, when we have customers in Yemen and the Yemen government comes to us, we follow. We follow the rules there, even if it's an authoritarian government and we don't think it's a good use. Hey, that's just what our policy is. And so you've taken the stance of, look, we're going to try to adhere to U.S. values and U.S. law as much as we possibly can, and
Yeah, I
treat
mean
all of our users with that kind of
that's
respect.
not a legal position. In
Yeah.
other words, that wasn't a legal position. That's more of a values and emotional
Yes.
position.
Yes. Yes.
And the answer to that is yes, but I very much value legal counsel
Hmm.
input, and will always seek their advice in all the decisions we make. But my leanings are as you
Yeah.
described.
Yeah. And that should be comfort to people in those countries who want to use the platform. But again, if it's being used for legitimate purposes,
Yes.
when you have authoritarian regimes, limited
Yep.
legitimate maybe viewed as, you and I see something as legitimate and they don't see it as legitimate when we're,
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you.
let's not paint you as a target for those countries to come after you.
Hey, listen, they've already tried to break in. Literally, you put something. We had 85 countries in parallel trying to break in. Day one. We're used to being attacked. It's in the nature of the business I've been in
Yeah.
for 30 years, and there's always people on the outside that would love to compromise you.
Okay, so I have a behind the scenes question, and if
Yeah.
you can't or don't want to answer the question, will either remove it or let you not answer it on the podcast. Um, do you see attacks on your platform ebb and flow with the news cycle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And that doesn't mean, in other words, there's a layer of defense around. You can see them hit it.
Hmm.
They make no penetration whatsoever. But there is definitely, a hacktivist element to anything that's on the internet now. And there is kind of even the politicization of cyber attacks in
Hmm.
terms of some go at infrastructure, some will go after embarrassing people.
Yeah.
And maybe they take down their website and put something up. Maybe that's not an infrastructure attack, but yes, the proxy, I call them proxy wars. The proxy wars that we're involved in Russia and in the Middle East drive behaviors
Yeah.
around the world.
Yeah.
And on
I
my blog, it's a blog. It's like blog-bunker.life. I've written about that extensively.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up,
Yeah.
um, if people are interested in Bunker, where can they find out more about it? Where can they find out more about you?
Yeah. I mean, bunker.life is the website. And then my personal profile on LinkedIn is Kurt Long. And whether you put Kurt Long in Bunker or Kurt Long in Fair Warning, you're going to find me. It's Kurt Long. I'm actually kite surfing in the picture. So if you see me kite surfing, that's me, in between trying to stop the bad guys. We're on Instagram under bunker.life, and on X, I think it's Bunker Life or bunker.life on X as well.
And Bunker's BUNKR with no
Thank
E.
you. You're a professional. Wow. But BUNKR with no E. I owe you a bottle of wine or something.
These days, you could never trust your intuition when it comes to names of
Yeah.
apps and platforms because, for one, every properly spelled word has been used.
Yes.
And
That's a real thing. It's a real story. Name between the domain name hoarders, and the trademark hoarders, it's tough to get some space in there.
you and I are laughing, but it is unfortunately very true that coming up with a consistent name that you can get a domain name
Yeah.
your app, get the social media accounts for, is really painfully hard to do.
Yes. Yeah. One last thing about the name is like this. We started it, I can't remember, somewhere we conceived of this thing somewhere in the COVID area. And people were not yet acclimated to the new world we live in. And they're like, are you sure Bunker's the right name? At the time, like, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a good name. And then as time went by, they're like, man, you got a great name, Bunker. I sure wish I had a bunker right now. BUNKR.
Everything comes full circle.
It does. So, well, it's been great to be with you, Chris. You had a great intuition for all these topics. I appreciate your questions and the
It's only
conversation.
because I talk to so many people like you, and to me, it's always fascinating, and even seeing how our views on privacy and security have ebbed over the last couple of years. I think probably 4 years ago, having a conversation about, hey, we need to have a platform where it's secure, it's subpoenaable. I would have been tarred and feathered for having that conversation, but I think now we're starting to see the impacts of, oh, if everything is secret, maybe some bad things actually happen because of that.
Yeah, I mean, we got to look to law and order from somewhere. I'm the first person not to trust a politician. We all have our suspicions, but we got to look to law and order from somewhere, and we can't allow ourselves just to decay
Yeah,
into a society that simultaneously doesn't respect privacy whatsoever, and people are easily taken advantage of by the information that's known about us. And on the other end of the spectrum, just having so much protected criminal activity that law enforcement can't do their job. I don't think that's the route we want to
yeah.
go. I think we want to go for the right balance of law and order. And I do say that in a balanced
Hmm.
way. I mean that with all my heart.
I love it. I love it. Kurt, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Thank you, Chris.